Today we're going to be learning Moed Katan Kaf Daled. This is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to start at the very top of the daf. Continuing on about this idea about Avilut b'Shabbat. We're going to have a funny. We're going to have a question and a very simple answer, which usually we don't get. Rabbi Yochanan asked Shmuel the following question: Yesh Avilut b'Shabbat or Ein Avilut b'Shabbat? Do we have Dinei Avilut, laws of mourning on Shabbat, or not? Amar le Ein Avilut b'Shabbat. He said, no, there is none. Rabbanit kamed Rav Papa, the Ka'amr Mishmei de Shmuel. The rabbi sat in front of Rav Papa and said in the name of Shmuel. Now, we seem to be getting off on a tangent. We'll get back to the issue of Shabbat. Okay, so again, just to review, very simply, Shmuel says there isn't Avilut on Shabbat. Okay, even though we know that there's this distinction, Barhesia, what you do in public and what you do in private, but we'll get back to that soon. Right now, we're taking a break and we're moving to a different topic. The rabbi sat in front of Rav Papa and said in the name of Shmuel, Avel sheshimesh mitato b'yom evlo chayav mita. If an avel had relations with a spouse during the time of their mourning, chayav mita, they're liable for death. Okay, that sounds very, very serious. Amalei Rav Papa said, Asur itmar umishmei Rabbi Yochanan itmar. It said that it's forbidden. It doesn't say you're obligated the death penalty, and it was said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, not in the name of Shmuel. So I don't know what you're talking about. If you did hear something about being liable for the death penalty in the name of Shmuel, this is really what you should have been learning. In other words, you obviously misquoted this. Amar Rav Tachlifa bar Avimi Amar Shmuel, Avel shelo para v'shelo pireh chayav mita. If a mourner doesn't grow his hair long and doesn't tear kriya, right, tear his clothes, then he's liable to get the death penalty. Where do we get this from? Shenemal. Dafka, it says specifically when it comes to the Kohanim, if you remember, the Kohanim meaning Aharon and his sons, the Kuna Gdola, they were told, the high priests, they were told, B'rashechem al tifrau, b'dechem lo tifromu, v'lo tamutu. Don't grow your hair long, don't tear your clothing in Avilut for Nadav and Avihu when they died, v'lo tamutu, and you won't die. That basically means you're not allowed to do laws of Avilut, and then you won't die, which means we're going to now say the flip. If you do that, you will die. Likewise, people who are supposed to generally do mourning practices and let their hair grow long and tear their clothing, and they don't, they will also die. By the way, death here we mean death by the hands of God, not by a court or anything like that. Ha'achir. So from there they say, okay, I didn't read the whole thing, but ha'achir shelo para v'shelo perem chayav mita. From there you can infer, if a regular person, not the Kohen Gadol, who's not allowed to do this, but if a regular person who's supposed to do this doesn't do it, they're also going to die. Amar Rafram bar Papa, Tana ba'evel Rabati, says it says in the Masechet Evel Rabati, this is a Masechet from the time of the Tanaim. Avel asur l'shamesh mitato b'yemei evlo. And Avel is not allowed to have relations during his mourning period. Even though we just said that Shmuel really didn't say you're liable for the death penalty for this, even though they thought that he did. Now, Rafram bar Papa, which is interesting, Rav Papa was again saying that Shmuel said this, but his son said that there was a case where somebody did this actually, and he actually got taken away by pigs, and they dragged away his dead body. Okay, he ended up dying because, according to the story, because he had relations with his wife when he was in Avel. Amar Shmuel. Okay, that was an aside we got to because we were mentioning something Shmuel said about Ein Avilut b'Shabbat. There's no Avilut on Shabbat. Now we're back to that topic. Amar Shmuel. Now it's going to be more specific. Pachaz chova, natal reshut. What does this mean? Pachaz. These are Rashi Tevot abbreviations. Pechet Zayim. We're going to see in a minute what that is. Those three things are obligatory to do on Shabbat, meaning we'll see in a minute, you're not allowed to do them on Shabbat, normal morning practices. Natal is reshut. They're optional. If you want to keep them on Shabbat, you can, but you don't have to. So what's pay? Pliat harosh. Okay, uncovering your hair. That means you have to take off this covering, hair covering that they used to wear, that they would cover. We'll see in a minute that it means they would cover most of their face with it even. Something we'll see that maybe was unique to mourners, maybe other people wore as well. We'll get to that. So you can't wear that because that's what we're going to see is that the first category seem to be public mourning practices. The Gemara doesn't use this term until much later in the daf about it being farhesi and sina, that things that you do privately, you can continue on Shabbat, things that are public, you can't. So uncovering your hair is a must. chazarat kera la'achorav, you have to take your tear. And if you have nothing else to wear, you have to turn it around and put it on your back so that people don't notice your torn clothing. And skifat mitan, you put the bed back in its proper place. That's chova. That's the pechet zayin. Natal stands for ni'ilat sandal, wear your shoes. Tashmish hamita, having relations with one's spouse. And rechitzat yadayim v'raglayim b'chamin, arvit, and washing your hands, feet, and legs in the evening before Shabbat is reshut. Okay, this is all optional, meaning these are things that theoretically you can walk around barefoot. It's not a sign of abelut if you don't wear your shoes. So you're allowed to wear your shoes, but you don't have to. If you have a relationship with your wife, that's obviously private. So you want to, you can, you don't have to. Not everybody has relations with their spouse every night, right? Or a relationship with their husband. Right, I said before, wife, house, husband, either which way. And the rechitzat yadayim v'raglayim, washing in hot water. So again, most of us do shower before Shabbat, but not everybody does. So, right, and certainly in those days, it was less common. The Rav disagrees with Shmuel and says, Af pliat harosh reshut. Even taking off your hair covering, you don't have to. The special hair covering that Avilim would wear, you could keep it on. So Shmuel, they want to know now, not everybody, Misanayu means he wears shoes. Not everybody wears shoes. Some people go around barefoot. So that's why Nilata Sandal is reshut. Well, Priyata Roshnami, Lav Koleama Avidi Dimegali Reshayu. What, does everybody take off their hair covering? In other words, some people walk around with the same hair covering. So if you want to, theoretically, you should be allowed to wear it if you want. You don't have to uncover your hair. So why did Shmuel put it in the category of things that you have to? So Shmuel l'ta'amei, he goes according to his own. He's consistent within his approach. Ta'amar Shmuel kol kera she'ena b'shat chimum ena kera. This one isn't related to our topic yet. We're really more concerned with the second thing he says. But the first thing here, let's just explain. Any tear you do that's not during the time of chimum, when you're very upset, meaning, but we usually do it before the burial, then it's not kera. In other words, that's not kriya. If you tear kriya during the week of Shiva, that doesn't count. The chol atifa she'ena ka'atifat Yishmaelim ena atifa. You don't cover your head the way the Ishmaelites do, which is they covered, there's a picture in the Koran actually, if you have it, but they would cover their whole face. We'll see in a minute what that means exactly, or part of their face. We'll see where. That's not considered atifa. In other words, there's a very unique way to cover the hair, the face, the head, and the face that people did specifically as mourners. And therefore, it's very unique. And that's why Shmuel says it's obligatory not to wear it, because otherwise it looks like you're an avel, and therefore you have to take it off. Whereas Rav didn't view it as something so unique. He thought any kind of hair covering is okay. And therefore, he permitted one to do it if they want on Shabbat. He showed everyone that it's over your beard, the area where one has a beard, that it would cover the entire bottom part of the face. Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Lo shanu ela sheyesh lo minalim beraglav. Rabbi Yochanan is now going to come and limit what Shmuel said. Shmuel said you have to take off this atifat Yishmaelim, right? This atifat arosh that's like the Yishmaelim, because the only time people wear it is when they're mourners. Therefore, you can't go around with it on Shabbat unless you're not wearing shoes. This is all if you're not wearing shoes. And then we don't know, are you not wearing shoes because you're a mourner, or you're not wearing shoes for other reasons? But if you're wearing shoes, then already everybody knows that you're not showing public signs of mourning. So even if you kept on your hair covering, it would actually be okay. It's interesting because you would think people will much more notice a hair covering than they will your shoes, but apparently people notice people's shoes as well. Kol kera she'ena b'shat chimum eno kera. Okay, any tear that's not, now we're going back to the statement Shmuel said that wasn't really germane to our topic, but now we're going to talk about it. When they told Shmuel that Rav died, he tore 12 different garments, okay, throughout the week, or we don't know, over a period of time. When Rav died, Shmuel was so sad by the loss of Rav, he tore 12 different garments. Now, Shmuel says, you only can do it during the Shat Chimum, so what was he doing tearing these 12 garments? And not only that, right, so now they said, he said, this man died who I was always scared of, right? I was scared, meaning in awe of him. Okay, they said to Rabbi Yochanan, when Rabbi Chanina died, Kara alei tresar itztele melata. Okay, when Rabbi Chanina died, I think they're talking about, 1 second. I thought they were talking about Rabbi Yochanan. I'm just trying to see who spoke to who here. 1 second. Sorry, I didn't read it right. Okay, let's start again. Amrei leile Rabbi Yochanan. They said to Rabbi Yochanan, nach nefshei de Rabbi Chanina. When they told Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Chanina died, kara alei tresar itztele melata. He tore 13 very fine wool garments. Amar azal gavra dava mistafin. I mean, he said the exact same thing Shmuel said about Rav, which is here, this amazing Talmid Chacham died, someone that I was in fear of. So how could they have torn all these clothing if Shmuel says it's only the one you do b'shat chimum? So they have a great answer. Shane Rabbanan kevan dechol shat hamit kreish matayu kishat chimum dame. The rabbis are always being remembered because every time Shmuel would learn something that Rav had taught, it's interesting because Rav and Shmuel argued all the time, but he had such respect for him. Whenever he heard something that Rav taught, he would all of a sudden it would be like opening it up all over again. It would make him very sad. And that's why for him, it was always shat chimum. And the same thing with Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Chanina. Amalei Ravin bar Ada l'Rava. Ravin says, bar Ada says to Rava, Amal. Amar Talmidcha Rav Amram, your student Rav Amram said, Tanya, he brought a braita. Avel kol shiv'a kol olefanav. Okay, all in the 7 days, the chair has to be in the front. V'im ba lachlif, machlif korea. Let's say you're hot and you want to change to a lightweight shirt or the reverse. So you put on a new clothing and you tear it as well. Here again, you're going to see it's not b'shat chimum, right? Not when you're at the cemetery. B'Shabbat koro la'achora v'im ba lachlif machlif eino korea. In Shabbat, you turn your cloak around so that you don't show it visibly. And if you want to change your clothes to put on Shabbat clothes, you can, and you don't have to tear that garment. Katan, so how do you explain that? Why was he tearing it all week, right? When you change your clothes, you tear it, even though it's not shat chimum. Again, we get back to this concept of respect for your parents. There's kriya in terms of the laws of tearing a garment. That happens by the funeral time when it's really raw. Later in the week, if you do it, that's just out of respect for a parent. That's a separate issue, right? That you shouldn't be without a torn garment that week. Otan k'cha'im. Now, when you tear your garment, mitachin or mitachin, can you sew it up after Shiv is over, or do you have to leave it forever torn? Very interesting question. They had a machloket. We don't know who said what. One of them said you can fix it. One of them said you can't fix it. Let's assume that the father of Rabbi Yashai, remember, it's the father of Rabbi Yashai or Bar Kappa. Must be the father of Rabbi Yashai. He's the one who said you can't fix it. Why? Because we know what his son said. We assume the son must be holding like his father. This is an interesting section because then the Gemara is going to say, Mikan shmiya le'elav me'avu. Miman shmiya le'elav me'avua, right? Who else would he learn it from if not his father? To which the Gemara says, Lo, mibar kapara rabbe shmiya le. You brought a bad example. There's Rabbi Yoshaya. Now, Rabbi Yoshaya, he had his father, Rav Oshaya, he had his father on one hand, but he also had his teacher on the other hand. So we don't know who he held like because he could have learned from his father, he could have learned from his teacher, and therefore, right? So therefore, we don't know. Amarava, Avel Metayel Ba'unkali B'toch Beito. In Avel, now it doesn't say this, but they mean on Shabbat. Rashi in the Ktav Yad in the manuscript says this. Avel on Shabbat is Metayel Ba'unkali B'toch Beito. He walks around in a robe that's torn within his house, because again, it's tzina, it's private. Abai Eshchel Rab Yosef, the Paris Le Sudara Areshe, Ba'azov Ate Bebeite. Okay, Abai saw Rab Yosef, he was walking around in his house with his hair covering for Avelut on his head. Amarle, Lav Savar Lamar, and Avelut B'Shabbat. Here we're going to finally get to the term Sin'ah. Amarle, Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Tavarim Shabbat Sin'ah Noheg. Says what this Rabbi Yochanan says, that anything private, you still continue to do. So I'm in my house, I can keep my hat on, my head covering on. Rabbi Eliezer Omer. Okay, back to the Mishnah. This is ready a while ago. We did this Mishnah about the difference. Do all the holidays cancel Shiva? There was a machloket. What about Shavuot, it's only one day. What about Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur? Okay, we had different opinions. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer, he said, once there's no longer a temple, Atzeret no longer has significance. Shavuot is no longer considered like a 7-day holiday because you can't bring the sacrifices, right? In the time of the temple, you could bring the sacrifices for 7 days. So it had a 7-day status to it. Once there's no longer a temple, it doesn't anymore. Amar of Gidol Bar Menashe, Amar Shmuel, Halacha Rabban Gamliel. That was Rabbi Eliezer, but comes from Gidol Bar Menashe, and he says we hold like Rabban Gamliel, which is in fact how we hold. That Shavuot cancels it, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, all of those things cancel Shiva or Shloshim, depending on what's happened. Remember, it cancels Shiva as long as you sat an hour before Shiva. Again, there were different opinions, 3 days or an hour. And it cancels Shloshim if you did some of Shloshim before. It's not going to cancel Shloshim, and we'll see this soon, if you only did Shiva, right? Then the holiday comes and cancels Shiva, but it doesn't cancel Shloshim. You have to have had some Shloshim in order for it to be canceled. So that was what Rav Gidol Bar Menashe said in the name of Shmuel. But some people said, no. Rav Gidol Bar Menashe was talking about something else entirely. He was referring to the following. We're going to talk about infant burial right now, which is a very difficult topic and interesting also in terms of how it's developed over time. And the sugya, I think, is going to be very interesting in that sense. Okay, until recently, most people who had infants who died were not invited to go to the burial. Okay, in general, the Chevra Kadisha took care of it, didn't even tell the parents where the graves were. And we'll talk about this soon. My husband, through his work at team, was very involved in changing the system because many parents do want to go see the grave and do want to know where it is and maybe visit later. And they were able to fight hard to change the way the custom was. And I want to say this, it's very important because what we're going to see here in the sugya is that there's no reference at all to the fact that parents shouldn't go to the burial. Okay, in fact, the opposite seems to be implied from the sugya. Okay, so let's start with this topic. Why did we get here? Because Rav Gidol Bar Menashe said in the name of Shmuel, we paskin like Rabban Gamliel in our Mishnah, and some people say, oh no, that's not what he said. He was talking about some other thing, and he didn't say halacha like Rabban Gamliel, and he didn't even say in the name of Shmuel. He paskin like someone else, and they're saying you misquoted something, and it has to do with a totally different topic. It's not totally different. It's about mourning, but it's about infant burial, and not about whether the holiday overrides Shiva. So some people, some people said what he said was about this. Now, it'll take us a little while till we get back to Rav Gidol. First, we have to learn the sugya. If the baby is less than 30 days old, which most infant burials, right, at least the ones that are more stillborn or lived for a very, very short period, so the baby gets carried out not in a coffin, but in someone's arms. It's buried by one woman and two men. Now, this doesn't mean you have to have a woman and two men, but what they're saying is you can go out. You don't need a minyan. Okay, why you would need a minyan at a burial? It's a good question. Not every burial has a minyan, but what they're saying is you don't really need any sort of minyan. You just need a woman and two men. That's fine. And we'll talk about why there's not the women and two men and why in those order. You'll see in a minute. They don't want you to have one man and two women. And this gets into laws of what we call yichud. We don't want two women and a man alone because we're worried something might happen. About people that aren't married to each other. And there's a concern that in a cemetery, it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere and something might go wrong, right? Someone might try to have relations with one of the people. That's yichud. It's a concern, right? We don't like to leave people alone in a room together if they're not married. So what they're talking here is you can have only 3 people if you want. And we're assuming that we're talking about also the Avelim. And that's why I think it seems clear here that it's likely the parents were there because whether the woman would be there, if not the mother of the child. Why they're talking about yichud, if it's the mother and the husband, that's another, right? If it's a father and mother, it's a little bit strange. So again, it's not exactly clear who these people are. But the point is, right, they're worried about, the main thing they're trying to say is, if there's not a lot of people worried about yichud. What are you talking about? They're going to bury a baby. Nothing's going to happen there. It's not exactly right there. And in fact, Tosfot quotes the first Tosfot on the daf here, I now just got to Amud Bet. It says in Masechet Kiddushin, even though normally laws of Yichud apply, we're assuming they're in Avelut right now. They're mourning over their baby that died, and they're obviously busy with things, and then it's allowed because we're not really worried about anything happening. Other things that don't apply here. You don't do a shura, which is this row where usually the Avelim walk and everybody stands on the side and says, right? Some sort of what do you say? A sentence of trying to console the people. You don't do that for a newborn that died, a stillborn, and you don't say this Birkat Avelim, which we've seen before, which was a bracha they said generally at the Seudat Havra'ah, the meal immediately after coming back from the Shiva, from the cemetery, and you don't have people come visit. Okay, that's generally what's practiced nowadays. Ben Shloshim, okay, and again, you don't see anything here about the parents don't come to the burial, right? That's some custom that developed over time. Probably they thought that it was in the best interest of the parents not to know, not to see, right? Which nowadays the psychology, at least the psychologists, social workers, right, do show that there is, right, that I'm sure there's different opinions about it, but there is significance and importance for the parents to have closure, to see the burial, to, yes, be part of it. Again, different, I'm sure there's many different opinions, but the main thing is that people should have the rights, and this is something in team they fought hard for, and other organizations as well. People should have the rights to be able to make their own choice about it, and not be told by the Chevra Kadisha you can't come, or be told that we don't even know where your infant is buried. So that's very important. Okay, so let's move on now. So that's the first stage, stillborn or under 30 days. Ben Shloshim. If the baby was already 30 days old, it goes out in a small coffin. Rabbi Yehuda not so small that you could just carry it over your shoulder, but something that you need two people to carry, so a little bit bigger. Then you already do the shura. People do come to console you. Ben Yud Bet Chodesh, when a baby becomes already a year old, Yotze b'mita, already gets buried in a normal coffin. Rabbi Akiva Omer, hu ben shana ve'evarav ki ben shtayim, hu ben shtayim ve'evarav ki ben shana. Not any just 1-year-old, but either a 1-year-old who's big as a 2-year-old size-wise, or a 2-year-old who's small as a 1-year-old. Either one of those will be buried in a regular-sized coffin, but not if you don't have one of those. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, hayotze b'mita rabim matzivim alav. Once it goes out in a coffin, it's of that age, then already people come and they're sad with the family and they get involved in the consolation process. But if not, if it's younger, then they kind of just leave it to the family, which is very interesting because also you see this. When, God forbid, there's a stillborn, often it's really left more for the family to deal with it internally. We don't have this big, right, partly because you don't have a Shiva. And, again, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm sure there's different approaches to it, and everybody, when they go through this kind of experiences it differently and has different needs. So in any case, it's an interesting topic here to see that, right, the sense is at that point we don't get the community involved, and maybe that's better. Rabbi Elazar ben Azalya Omer, Nikar leRabim, he puts it different. It's not about whether it's in the coffin or not, or whether it's 2 or 1 or whatever the cutoff is. It's a matter of, was this child known to people? Right? Often you have little kids born and people don't know them. And sometimes you have little kids born that everybody knows and they're part of the community. So if it's Nikar leRabim, then Rabim mitaskim. If everybody knows the child, then yes. Eino Nikar leRabim, ein Rabim mitaskim. But if he's not known to most people, then no, they don't get involved, meaning they don't go to the house, they don't come to the eulogy, etc. Umahem bespe, what about a eulogy? Right, so I mentioned eulogy, I shouldn't have yet. Okay, that's not really talking about eulogy, that's talking about kind of being involved in the burial or maybe visiting the family. But what about hesped? Okay, what about that? So now they say, aniyim, they make this interesting distinction, okay, whether, again, can argue whether this makes sense or not. Poor people, b'nei shalosh. Rabbi Meir b'shem Rabbi Yishmael Omer. Okay, Rabbi Meir said the name of Rabbi Yishmael. Poor people when they're 3, ashirim b'nei chamesh. Wealthier people only when the child's 5. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishmo. Rabbi Yehuda actually says in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, Aniyim b'nei chamesh, ashirim b'nei shesh. It's not 3 and 5, it's 5 and 6. Ubnei's kenim ki b'nei aniyim. And the elders are like the poor people. Why is there this distinction? A bunch of interesting explanations have been brought. Some people say that poor people are much closer with their children. First of all, they give up a lot more for them. They give up their food for their children, and maybe they're closer with their children for that reason. Some people say it's because, and again, one can argue with this. I'm sure there's a lot of wealthy people that care tremendously for their children, and I don't think that this is at all a true statement. This is just a possibilities about why this is. Some people say it has nothing to do with how close they are with their children because they give up things for their children or don't give up. It's not that. It has to do with, and again, I'm leaving out right now this kenim, we'll get back to them. Poor people are more sad when their children die because they were planning on those children growing up. Like you might say, wait, but they have to feed. It's another mouth to feed. Maybe they'll be happy. But no, over the long term, it's someone who can work and bring money into the family. So they're much sadder at the loss than a wealthier person. And then makes sense this kenim. Some people say this kenim actually means very old people because old people were expecting the younger ones to take care of them. That's another possibility. Anyway, there's some other explanations given. It's actually quite a difficult sugya because why would you distinguish between rich people and poor people and how much they would need to eulogize their children? It seems a little bit strange. Again, without living in their world, it's also hard to understand the distinctions they make between different social groups. And now, okay, why did we get to here? Okay, now if you remember, we had this Gidol Bar Menashe said, Paskan like Rabban Gamliel about our Mishnah. Some people said, no, he actually was talking about this. And what was he talking about? This last issue we just said. Amar of Gidol Bar Menashe, Amar Rav. And now he's not saying it in the name of Shmuel, but in the name of Rav. Halachat Rabbi Yehuda, Shamar Mishum Rabbi Yishmael. Okay, right? There was a machlokah. What did Rabbi Yishmael say? What was the distinction he made between rich and poor? Was it 5 and 6 or was it 3 and 5? And he paskins like Rabbi Yehuda that it's 5 and 6. Until that age, you don't eulogize. Moving on. He gave a drasha in the opening, in the entranceway of the house of the Nasi. This is very interesting. Remember, you sit for, let's say, an hour before the holiday. Holiday comes in, so your week of Shiva gets canceled. So it's already as if you're on day number 7 when the holiday starts. Then the holiday itself, even though it's only 1 day, it counts as 7 days. So you're already at day 14 of your shloshim. Remember, you don't cancel shloshim because you haven't done any days of shloshim yet. So your shloshim starts after, but you're already halfway into the month. Shama Rabbi Ami ve'ikpid. Rabbi Ami heard this and got very upset. Not because he disagreed with him, but you'll see why in a minute. Amal, atu didehi. Bar Sasson, Rabbi Anani Bar Sasson, you're getting up and saying this as if this is your new halacha, your chidush. But he says, De Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yoshai. Rabbi Elazar said this in the name of Rabbi Yoshai, and you have to say it in the name of whoever said it. Same story is going to happen in Babylonia. Daresh Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, Akila Daresh Kaluta, right? That was in the house of the Nasi in Israel. Now, the parallel to the Nasi is the Resh Kaluta. It's interesting that both these stories happen in a very public place from like the head of the area. So Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha goes in the entranceway of, in the pavilion of Rav Resh Kaluta. Yom echad lefnei atzeret v'atzeret harei kan arba'a asar. He says the exact same law. Shama Rav Sheshet heard, ve'ikpid, he got upset with him, right, instead of Rabbi Ami. In the first story, this is Rav Sheshet. Amar atu didehi, what, you think this is your statement? To Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yoshai. How do we know this? Amar Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yoshai, minayin la'atzeret sheyesh la tashlumin kol shiv'ah, shene'amar b'chag hamatzot u'chag ha'shavuot. Ma chag hamatzot yesh la tashlumin kol shiv'ah, av chag ha'shavuot yesh la tashlumin kol shiv'ah. This is very interesting. Rabbi Elazar did not say in the name of Rabbi Yoshai the Salacha. What did he say? Said that in the Torah they're listed together. Chag HaMatzot, Chag HaShavuot. Why are they listed together? To tell you that just like Chag HaMatzot, you can do the Korban Chagiga all the days of the holiday, 7 days altogether. Likewise in Shavuot, you could do it for 7 days, which shows that Shavuot is parallel to Pesach in that way. Which then we can infer, if he already says that, then we'll assume that when it comes to Shiva, he's going to treat it also as a 7-day holiday, even though it's really only 1 day. So it's a bit of a jump. It's interesting that both Rav Sheshet and Rabbi Ami thought that it was obvious from this statement that they would say the same thing about the Shiva, that the whole holiday of 1 day can count as 7 days. Ad B'Rev Rav Papa Rav Avia Sava Udarash. Rav Papa gave permission to Rav Avia Saba to give a drasha, and Rav Avia got up and said, Yom echad lefnei Rosh Hashanah v'Rosh Hashanah harei kan arba asar. Same thing holds true for Rosh Hashanah, even though it's interesting as Rosh Hashanah doesn't have tashlumin. It's very interesting he says it, but he says any holiday counts as 7 days. Amar Ravina hilkach, therefore, what about this one? Yom echad lefnei achag v'chag u'shmini shelo harei kan 21 yom. Let's take Shmini Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret. So person dies a day before Sukkot. That already counts as a week. Next day, right, you have the holiday of Sukkot. That counts as 7 days. Then you have Shmini Atzeret. That counts as 7 days because that's a chag in and of itself. So you've already gotten up to 21. So by the time your chag is over, you only have a few more days left of Shloshim, right, to get to 20. Ravina Ikla L'Sura de Prat. He got to the city Surah that was on the Nahar Prat. Amar le Rav Chaviva, Misura de Prat le Ravina. So Rav Chaviva from there says to Ravina, Amar Mar, did you say Yom Echad Lefnei Rosh Hashanah v'Rosh Hashanah harei kan arba asar? Did I hear that in your name? Amar le, he said, Ana mistabra k'Rabban Gamliel hu damina. Different explanations about what he's saying here, but many people think that what he's saying is, no, I never said that. All I said is that I hold like Rabban Gamliel. We're going to treat Shavuot and Rosh Hashanah as things that cancel Shiva, but I never said that it's 14 days, that it counts, that one day counts as 7 days of your Shloshim. That's the main way to understand. Again, there's some other ways to understand it, but we'll leave it at that. Last part for today, we're going to read the Mishnah and finish the Mishnah, and with that, we'll finish our daf. If you're not a relative, then you don't do kriya. You don't take off your shoes. That's the chalitza that we're talking about here. You don't say the Sudat Havra'ah. Remember, we saw before someone was doing Shiva with his wife, and then someone said, what are you just going here for the food? Right? Because you don't eat the food if you're not one of the Avelim. Ein mavlin ela al mitaz kufa. And when you do the Sudat Havra'ah, you don't do it on a overturned bed. You do it on a regular bed. I guess they ate on their beds as well. You do it on a regular bed. You don't do that meal on the floor. Okay, with that, we'll finish our daf and we will start with the Gemara on this tomorrow. Have a Shabbat Shalom or Shavuot.